Debbie serves as a United States Geological Survey geologist with the Science Application for Risk Reduction Project, working to facilitate the implementation and understanding of natural hazards science by partners and stakeholders in the community. She received a BA degree from Occidental College in geology, and she's finishing her PhD in geology at UCLA. Debbie's PhD research focuses on induced or man-made earthquakes. And this is a terrific presentation. Debbie, please take it away.
Thank you for that great introduction, Susan. I have some slides I want to go through today with you guys. And today I'm going to be talking about the natural hazards that we face living in California, and more specifically about the hazards that you face living in Holby Hills, Westwood, Bel Air, Beverly Crest, West LA, the general area. And I'm going to go into detail about what some of those hazards are and some resources available to you to be able to do your own research and understand more about the hazards specific to exactly where you live. I'm also going to go into what science can tell us about a big one or a really large earthquake. And I will close with an overview of some preparedness tips and what to do before, during, and after an earthquake. Okay, so California is a multi-hazard state. Hazards are the disasters that are waiting to happen, and they can only become disasters with people and infrastructure. That's our risk. So California is home to multiple different types of hazards. Landslides, droughts, as we are very familiar with, fires, floods, debris flows, tsunamis, we have the potential to experience those here as well, and earthquakes, which can cause landslides, fires, floods, and tsunamis. So we're going to talk about earthquakes today because that's my expertise. I moved to Southern California 10, 11 years ago, and ever since then I've been living, breathing, learning, and teaching about earthquakes. So I feel like I can answer most of your questions, hopefully, about earthquakes. So we're going to focus in a bit on Southern California to start, and I'm going to point out some major faults to you guys. This is a fault map of Southern California. I could go up there, but I'm going to zoom in a little bit, so I'm not going to go up there and point things out quite yet. So in Southern California, there are well over 300 mapped active faults. I say mapped with emphasis because the Northridge earthquake was on a fault that was not mapped. So earthquakes can happen on faults that we don't even know exist. So we know that there is a high hazard based on what geology we understand and know, but there's still more out there we don't know about. So let's zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to come up on the stage really quickly and point out a couple of faults. Sorry. Okay, so anybody have a guess what this giant red fault is right here? The San Andreas Fault. So we're about 60 miles away from the San Andreas Fault here, give or take a little bit. So over here, this is the San Jacinto Fault, this is the Elsinore Fault. This is the fault that I'm a little bit scared about. This is the Newport-Inglewood Fault. I live right here. Okay? So with reason, I'm a little bit nervous about that one. And then this right here is a combination of the Santa Monica and Hollywood Fault. So we're going to zoom in on those just a little bit. It's much easier down than up. Okay, so this is the California State Fault Map, and I've zoomed in on West Los Angeles. So you can actually go on the internet and type in California Fault Activity Map, and you can actually click around the state and see where all of the different faults are. Yeah, move back. So as I mentioned, the Newport-Inglewood Fault that we saw running up through the west part of the LA Basin terminates somewhere in this area. Red means it's had rupture recently on it. The Santa Monica and Hollywood Fault, like I mentioned, is right here. You know, if you guys are driving on Westwood Boulevard towards Santa Monica, the Mormon Temple is there with that beautiful big grass lawn in front. That's the Santa Monica Fault. Okay? If you're in Hollywood looking up that giant hill, that's the Hollywood Fault. Okay, so faults exist in our urban environment, and oftentimes we're right on top of it and we don't even know. Okay? Notice So here, I'll take through. There's different colors on the map. That just tells you the relative, how recent the ruptures have been on those faults. So that's where we are. It's a great location. And this is just color coding on the map. So any questions about the faults really quickly? Yes. Any clarification questions? Yes, ma'am.
Isn't Stadtwinter then for Inglewood, isn't that Century City? Isn't that built right on top of us?
So that's the dashed orange line.
Yeah.
That means it's less well constrained. Less well constrained. We don't know exactly the location of it, but we know it's there. Just about questions really quickly. I'm going to ask for like clarification questions as we go, but if you have a question that isn't about what I'm on right then, let's hold those till the end. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, there has been extensive press about the exact mapping of the location of the fault.
Yes.
Obviously, we have more care about the Santa Monica fault that you just pointed out. As I understand, this is an ongoing process. What's the timeline? Where are you going to have that information available for this specific area right here around UCLA?
Specifically about the Santa Monica fault?
No, specifically this area around UCLA.
So the question was basically, when are we going to have more detailed information about the faults around UCLA, correct?
Yes.
That if you want to provide the funding to the State Geological Survey, they'll happen real fast. So it's, I don't mean that tongue in cheek, but so they had enough funding last year to do one fault study. That's it. They cut the state's funding for studying the earthquake faults. So I have no idea what the answer to that question is. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's going to be a while. This is a pretty good map, though. Like we have a good basic understanding. Yes.
I missed what you said about that red area.
The red, that just means that there's been an earthquake rupture. The red means there's been an earthquake rupture within the last 200 years. So there was a small earthquake on that section of the fault. Yes, ma'am.
Where is exactly the 405 across the Wilshire along that map?
Okay, so for reference, this is the 10, 110 through downtown right there, and the 405 is right here. So the 405-10 intersection is right there. 405.
So Wilshire is sitting on...
Wilshire is, let's see if I can do it. I think it's right here. It's, I mean, the Santa Monica Boulevard crosses the Santa Monica Fault. Like it runs along the Santa Monica Fault for quite a while. So this is probably, this looks like Santa Monica Boulevard right there.
And when you put the arrow saying we're here, is that the beginning of Beverly Hills or is that?
That was my best guess at where this church is.
So,
because this is where UCLA is, so we're right here. You can zoom in more on the map if you go to your computer and do it yourself. And the next resource I'm going to tell you guys about actually also is really helpful. So this is, if you just go on the internet and search California landslide maps or liquefaction maps, it'll take you to this website. It's through the California Department of Conservation. And what it is, you can go and anywhere there's a red square, like this map has red and blue squares, the red squares means they have a map, the blue squares means they don't. So we are in that red square. So if I go and click on this right now, I don't know if you can see my mouse, right up here it says fault zone map and landslide or liquefaction map. Their fault maps aren't very good, honestly, but their landslide and liquefaction maps are really good. So if you click on the link right there, it'll take you to a map like this. Okay, so I put a little yellow and blue star where we are, okay, just on the east side of UCLA's campus. And what this is it's a landslide and liquefaction map. So landslides can happen in earthquakes when the ground is jostled around, a bunch of loose sediments can fall, okay, in various different manners. Liquefaction is when it basically becomes like a quicksand. The ground becomes kind of like quicksand. Water that is deeper is pushed up through vibration in the earth and saturates what was dry sand or soil. That's not a good thing that can happen, okay? So there was an earthquake in Japan. Buildings weren't necessarily destroyed, like brought down pancake style, but liquefaction caused them to tilt like this. And they were essentially destroyed because people couldn't live in them. They couldn't tilt them back upright. They couldn't, the foundation was destroyed. So liquefaction is a bad issue as well. So, again, we are right where this star is. A lot of you guys live up in the hills around here, okay? You have both landslide and liquefaction hazard risks. The places where you have liquefaction hazards are a lot of places where the roads are, okay? That's because they're old drainages, and where the old drainages are, that's where a lot of the loose, unconsolidated sediments are that shake a lot during an earthquake. And water can come up through that sediment and liquefy, and so you have roads that are easily destroyed. Even if the fault doesn't go through there, they can be destroyed by the shaking. Okay.
Is liquefaction more prevalent in the hills then?
I'm going to show, actually you can see on this map.
Can you repeat your question?
The question was, is liquefaction more prevalent in the hills? Did everyone hear that? So on this map, you can actually see right here, anywhere that's green is a liquefaction hazard. Anywhere that's blue, I know they're kind of hard to differentiate the colors. The blue is landsliding. Okay, so I'll point it out. Okay, so blue. This is a landslide hazard. Those are the hills. Okay, liquefaction hazards are the drainages. That's the 405. The 405 is a liquefaction hazard. Okay? All of the canyons have liquefaction hazards right here. Okay? This whole area in West Hollywood is a liquefaction hazard. The cemetery has a big liquefaction hazard. Okay? So there's a lot of areas in this West Los Angeles area that have a high hazard for liquefaction. Yes, ma'am?
So the buildings that end up tilting around like Pisa, the records show that they had maybe some floors at that basis, which are parking garages or empty.
Not necessarily.
So
you can have a rigid, strong, well-built building that that is exposed to liquefaction that will be compromised because of the liquefaction, even if it doesn't have a soft first story or just a parking garage at the bottom.
okay, so do those buildings are more likely to have that scenario or less?
No, no different. Depends on the ground they're built on. Yes, sir.
And we were told that there's a river that runs underground right around Holby Park.
Yep.
Is that a liquefaction area?
Yes. Anywhere that had a river at any point, even if it's the channelized Los Angeles River, is a higher liquefaction hazard because of all of these loose, unconsolidated sediments. Even if liquefaction doesn't occur there, shaking will still be higher. So I'm going to show a map later on that talks about that, and we'll get back to that.
So having that as a meeting area might not be a great idea.
It depends. You really need to look at the mapping of it. Really. Like the park, I don't know anything about the park. If it's a big park and the river was only on one side of it, it's not a problem to be on the other side. Yes, and then we're going to move on.
Are you going to talk about how you can prepare your home if you live in a liquefaction area?
No, I'm not. The question was, will I talk about how to prepare your home if you're in a liquefaction area? I'm not going to go into the specifics of like bolting it to the foundation and that kind of thing, but there's some information up here that Mark brought that tells you how to go through and look for hazards in your home. And a lot of this information is available on the internet as well. And it has information about how to better secure your home and your belongings. I'm going to move on for just the sake of time, but you can come back to other questions later. Sorry if I'm cutting you off. Okay. So another resource I want to present to you guys is something called My Hazards. And the website is listed at the top. It's myhazards.calema.gov. It's the California Office of Emergency Management or California Emergency Management Agency. They change their name every few years. And it's basically the California FEMA. It's the state level FEMA. This is actually one of the best tools that I know of. This is something that I wanted to make, but I couldn't. This is excellent. It's only been around for about 2 or 3 years.
Would you read that email address?
Yes,
again?
it's myhazards, one word, .calema, CALEMA.gov. California Emergency Management Agency, CalEMA. And so what I've done is I've just taken an image of the website that you go to. And at the top, what you can do is you can put in your address. So I put the address of the church, okay? And it lists your hazards for earthquakes, flood, fire, and tsunami. There's information for what you can do about each hazard and what your level of hazard is and how to prepare and mitigate the risk. So what I've done is I've put a box around earthquake hazard, okay? So we are in an area that can experience high ground shaking.
Say that again.
We are in an area that says you are in or near the following. High ground shaking. So in an earthquake, the ground will shake a lot. And so this map on the right-hand side of the image over here, there we go. This map, the red dot is us, okay? And it's got colors that are kind of hard to see. Unfortunately, they're all brown tones, but it shows your liquefaction hazard, your flood hazard, your fire hazard, your earthquake hazard. Okay. Yeah. So, yes.
Question. What magnitude earthquake would you say would be relevant to
Liquefaction?
Yes.
So the question from Chuck is, what magnitude of an earthquake would cause a liquefaction event? They used to think it was actually pretty high. Around a 7 can cause liquefaction. I don't think there was any liquefaction in Northridge, which was a 6.7. However, I don't know if anyone remembers. There was liquefaction right here? Okay, so a 6.7 can cause liquefaction. Probably lower then. Do you guys remember hearing about the earthquakes in Christchurch, New Zealand? So they don't often speak about the magnitude of the earthquake that causes it. They speak about the acceleration of the ground and how strong the ground shakes that can cause liquefaction. There's a certain threshold that they thought was the minimum that they would observe liquefaction at. After that earthquake, all of the aftershocks that occurred, there were seven events that caused liquefaction and lowered the threshold of what they thought could cause liquefaction. So it's not very much ground acceleration at all. It's like 0.2 G can cause it if there's already been a big earthquake. Yeah.
For those of us that really don't know, I don't know, but you think in terms of quicksand, what would it be like if somebody was in the midst of it? Would you be able to walk through it? You just couldn't drive through it? Your car couldn't go anywhere? What would happen?
So the question was, what does it look like? What does liquefaction look like if you're in it, seeing it, observing it, feeling it? So the ground's probably going to be shaking on you. So that's what you're going to probably be more aware of. There's a video that you can look at on the internet, and it's from the 2011 Japan earthquake, and it shows in a park. It's all reclaimed land, so they just put a bunch of fill in. And during the earthquake, a man stands there for 3 minutes filming the ground shaking and liquefaction occurring. And what it looks like is there's puddles of water that appear on the ground that weren't there before. And then when the energy moves through the earth, when the seismic waves move through the earth, you see the water, basically you can see it's like pressurizing. It's like if there were a bunch of water bottles underneath there and someone was squeezing them, you would get little spurts of water coming up. And if you tried to walk on it, it would be like a quick mud or a quicksand. It's not going to swallow you whole, but it can have that effect on buildings where the foundation is no longer secure and stable because the ground is no longer supporting it underneath. I hope that answered that question. Yes, ma'am?
Well, that happened in the 94 earthquake in Sherman Oaks, where the LA River course had changed and those buildings collapsed and there were casualties.
Was that where the hospital was?
No. That was, they were all, there were multiple family
apartment
buildings.
homes. Yeah. Okay, I didn't know there was liquefaction. Okay, so I'm gonna keep moving forward in the sake of time. I have a lot more to get through. Okay, so zooming in on this My Hazards resource, I wanted to do a close-up of the map. I'm not sure that everyone can really see it. There's not a whole lot to see. Most of it's the same color, which says high hazard shaking, okay? However, if you look up to the top, the right-hand map is the zoomed-in map. Up here in the top left-hand corner, that's also high liquefaction hazard and high landslide hazard. So again, this is another map that shows your liquefaction hazard, your landslide hazard, and your earthquake hazard.
Where is that area?
Where is that?
Where's the location?
Yeah.
Beverly Glen.
This church.
Ah,
Oh, yeah, there's Upper Park.
It's the red circle.
No, well,
This is the location that we're looking
the
at.
higher
No,
part
the-
where there's liquefaction.
This is up in the hills right above Sunset.
Miller.
Yeah. So this is Sunset Boulevard right here, and this is going up into the hills above Sunset. Okay. Okay. So this is all available on the internet. You can find this information for your home address, and it has tips on what to do in the event that, or to basically prepare for these types of events occurring. Okay, so it has a checklist of what to do to reduce your risk for damage in high ground shaking. So it's a really good resource for that, and it has tips for your home and your property as well. It also has tips about securing common materials or hazardous materials, and all of that is available on the website. It also has information from FEMA and Red Cross about safety and preparedness. Okay, so I want to zoom back out to the state of California. So we already talked about the San Andreas Fault, which runs almost the entire length of the state of California. And it is the plate boundary between the North American plate and the Pacific plate. So we currently are on the Pacific plate. San Francisco, Barstow, Palm Springs, they're all on the North American plate. We're separated by the San Andreas Fault. The plate moves about the rate of your fingernail growth, so about 5 centimeters a year. And it moves in that direction, kind of northwest, southeast, okay? So the last big San Andreas earthquake in Northern California was 1906, and it was along that red line. It was a magnitude 7.8 earthquake, and it destroyed a majority of the city. A lot of it was destroyed in the Great San Francisco Fire, which was caused by the earthquake. Something that I think is fascinating, the decade after that earthquake was the largest period of growth for Los Angeles. I bring that up because we don't want that to happen here, okay? Southern California's last great earthquake on the San Andreas Fault, 1857, even longer ago, okay? So, since the last Southern California big one, that's what it looked like back in 1857. There were very few people who lived here. I mean, very few. You can count the number of families on a few of our hands, okay? Very few people lived in Southern California. So it was a magnitude 7.9 earthquake. The population of Los Angeles was somewhere in the vicinity of 4,000 people. A lot has changed since then. Okay, depending on the numbers that you look at, there's more than 10 million people in Los Angeles County, 22 million plus in Southern California. Not to mention, we've built ourselves a very beautiful, albeit complicated, set of infrastructure. Okay? We are dependent on the internet like no other. We are dependent on cell phones. Okay? This wasn't around in 1857. Okay? So our understanding of what a big earthquake looks like in Southern California, our best guess comes from Northridge. And that could be an aftershock of the big one. Easily. There could be bigger aftershocks than Northridge. Okay? We got real quiet. So just a little bit of science, and then we're going to get more into what this big one looks like. But I want to talk about seismic waves. So those are the earthquake waves that move through the ground during an earthquake. They're generated by an earthquake. So there's two different like families of waves. They're the body waves that go through the earth, and then there's surface waves that move along the top of the earth, okay, on the outside of the earth. So body waves, those are P waves and S waves. P, primary, first. S, secondary, second, okay? A P wave is a compressional wave. It's like a sound wave. It moves straight at you. An S wave moves more like a snake, so it takes longer to travel. So the first wave you feel, the P wave, the primary wave, that's the jolt you feel on your house in those little earthquakes. Okay, that's all you feel in those. The S wave, you'll start to feel that in bigger earthquakes as a separate bump. Okay, so if it's a close by small earthquake, you usually just feel, and then the earthquake's over. If it's a bigger earthquake a little further away, sometimes you can actually differentiate the P wave and the S wave. You feel a little bump, and then you feel a little shake. That's the P wave and the S wave. Show of hands. You guys remember on Easter Sunday, 2010, the big earthquake down in Mexicali? It was like a 7.2. Who felt that? Wow, I felt that. I felt seasick afterwards. That's the largest earthquake I have ever felt. It was a 7.2. I was in Santa Monica for that, which is a lot of loose sediments. We talked about how that is going to make it seem like it shakes more strongly. It shook for about 15 to 20 seconds on an earthquake that was a few hundred miles away. I felt the surface waves. So there's the P waves and the S waves that move through the body of the earth. Then the surface waves move along the surface of the earth. Those are the damaging waves. Those are the biggest waves. Those are the ones that are going to feel the most strongly and that can wreak the most havoc. Okay? Those are the ones that if you've ever felt like you've been on a boat in an earthquake where you feel this kind of like weird rolling motion, that's a surface wave. Okay? If you've ever seen a seismogram, these old drum recorders that recorded earthquakes, the first sign of anything, that's the P wave hitting. Then there's a bunch of noise. Then the second big blip you see, that's the S wave. And then the surface waves are the tail. Those are the things that take up the most space and that you feel for the longest. Okay? Also, the further you are away from a big earthquake, the longer that tail is going to feel because the waves have time to spread out. So even if you're close to an earthquake, the damage is going to be bad because that's going to shake really hard, but we might experience an earthquake with longer duration of shaking if we're further away. The damage might not necessarily be as bad, but it might be scarier because it's going to last longer potentially. Depending on where you were in the Northridge earthquake in 1994, people say the earthquake lasted different amounts. The earthquake lasted 7 seconds. I can tell you that. However, the shaking in different locations lasted longer. Okay, that's the time it takes for the waves to get to you. Yes?
If there was an earthquake on the San Andreas Fault, how long do you expect that to last?
The duration of the earthquake,
Yeah.
or the shaking time?
Both.
So as I'm going to show in a second,
And what would we feel right here? In
I'm going to get to that. So I'm not going to answer that question right now because I've got about
Fine.
8 slides on that.
Okay,
So let's get to it. Okay, so I want to talk to you guys right now about earthquake scenarios and disaster scenarios. So using what we know about the faults in California, which I've talked to you guys a lot about, and what we know about seismic waves and the way the earth behaves, scientists can create scenarios to better understand the potential future impacts of these hazards. So people in my profession, we are interested in earthquakes, but we don't often get a chance to study the big ones and the impacts they can have on our communities. So scenarios allow us to model what will likely happen based on the best science that's available. So it's our way of giving it our best guess based on all of the best science that we can put together. Okay, so I want to talk to you guys about the big earthquake scenario for Southern California for what the big one might be like. So it's called the shakeout scenario, and I got to be part of the team that put it together. There were about 300 experts. There were economists, there were sociologists, there were seismologists, there were social scientists. We had psychologists that we talked to about psychology of disaster. So experts from across the board came together and put this scenario together to use what we understood about earthquakes to see how it would impact the community. So what will the big one be like, to answer your question? So it will greatly affect the 8 counties in Southern California. This map on the right here shows in black the fault rupture, starting at the star. That's where the epicenter of the earthquake is, down by the Salton Sea. And then the hot colors show really strong and intense shaking. Okay? Most of it's near the fault, but as you can see, it branches out into the basins quite well. The rupture will be about 300 kilometers, or 180-ish miles, magnitude 7.8. The fault will rupture for 100 seconds. Yeah, so 300 kilometers. It takes a long time for that much ground to move, okay? In some places, there will be ground shaking for over 2 minutes. It's a really long time. Northridge, again, the rupture was 7 seconds, and people could have felt up to 15 or 20 seconds of shaking. There will be disruption to our critical infrastructure. Freeways, internet, power, gas lines, and there will likely be surface rupture through the Cajon Pass, where there was just that big truck fire that shut down the pass for a while. There will probably be surface rupture. So if you're driving the I-15 through Cajon Pass, where there's the big railways at the bottom of the pass, you're driving up on the side, the San Andreas Fault runs right through there. Okay, so when an earthquake happens, it's not going to be pretty. Images, 300,000 buildings destroyed or damaged. Transportation will be impacted. There will be many roads that are impassable due to damage, debris, landsliding, fault rupture, gridlock, stranded commuters. People will just leave their cars if they can't get anywhere. Lifelines, so the things that keep us alive, will be disrupted. Water systems will be damaged. There will be no water potentially for weeks to months. That's really the big bad one. Our pipes are breaking with no earthquakes. There will be gas outages, there will be phone systems overwhelmed, potentially damaged and needing repair. Fire following the earthquake is projected to double the losses, so that's included in the totals, but it will have a big impact, especially if we're in drought. And then there will be a very likely damaging aftershock sequence that could occur for decades. Yes?
I don't understand what the last sequence, the last decades means. The ground shaking.
Aftershocks? Yeah, so after a large earthquake, so scientists can't predict earthquakes. Anyone who tells you that we can predict an earthquake is lying to you. We can't do it. The time where we can best tell you that an earthquake will occur is right after an earthquake. It's really helpful. So after a large earthquake, it is natural for there to be, like, you know when you are in your house and it kind of creaks and moves, it settles? The ground has to continue to settle after a large earthquake. Okay, so after this big shock to the ground, there's a continuation of movement that's kind of the relaxation of the earth back into a less stressed state, if you will. And those are aftershocks, the continual movement of the ground in relaxation. Those are aftershocks, and they can be big. An aftershock is not a small earthquake. You're not going to feel anything different. It's still going to feel like an earthquake. It just means that it happens after the biggest earthquake. So there's nothing different about aftershocks. But we know that they will happen, and they will be big, and they will continue to impact and hurt the communities when they're already struggling.
After a big earthquake,
yes.
How long can aftershocks continue?
They can last a century. So the earthquake in Japan in 2011 was a magnitude 9 or 9.1. They're going to be having aftershocks for a century. Okay? So there's a long continuation of earthquakes. Guys, I'm going to share this. So I talked about how shaking can be amplified in areas with loose, unconsolidated sediments. This map shows that. Okay, so the yellow is 5 times amplification of shaking. Where are those areas? The Los Angeles Basin, the Valley, Simi Valley, And then on the other side of the San Andreas Fault, up in the San Joaquin Valley. Okay? So the word valley and basin, that is not your friend for shaking. Okay? So anywhere that you are not on hard rock, notice the areas that are purple. That's 1 times amplification, so just normal shaking. Those are mountains. That's something you guys have going for you if you live in the hills up here. You will feel less amplification of shaking. It's going to shake less strongly up in the hard rock mountains and hills. In the valleys, it's going to shake much more strongly. Again, that's because there are loose, unconsolidated sediments, and what's a good analogy for this? So if I wanted to eavesdrop on my sister, I would put my ear up to a solid wood door, and I would be able to hear her talking. The waves of her voice, the sound waves of her voice would travel through that door well because it's solid. I would not build a jello mold around my ear. That would muffle the sound. I would not be underwater. Waves don't travel well through water. It's not hard, it's not solid. Okay, so the hard, solid rock, the waves will pass through. They will shake strongly, but they will pass through. Where you have unconsolidated loose sediments, that bowl of jello, the waves will be trapped in there and reverberate off the walls of the basin and continue to shake it for longer. So in the hills, you might have 20 to 30 seconds of shaking. In Santa Monica, you could have 60 to 75 seconds of shaking. San Bernardino, Riverside, not in the hills, maybe 80 seconds of shaking. Okay? It really does increase the time the ground is shaking at a high amplification. Okay, so this is not just a disaster for Southern California. Okay, this will impact the entire nation and potentially the world. So this, I like it because it looks like veins, but this is a truck flow map based out of Los Angeles. So these are all of the routes that trucks drive out of Los Angeles. And this is from about 2 decades ago. So it's a little old, but it illustrates my point, okay? If you cut off that valve where everything is coming from, the San Andreas blocks Los Angeles from everywhere except pretty much San Diego. The goods are not going to be moving out of Southern California. Neither are they going to be moving into Southern California. Even if the port of Long Beach and Los Angeles is able to operate, they can't move goods out. So everything's going to stay in port and nothing can come in. Or out, really. That's not a good scenario either. So it's really important to be able to keep our infrastructure accessible and moving after a big earthquake. We want as little downtime as possible, basically. Let's get that one. Okay, so this is an interesting graph. So people kind of get scared by graphs. There's no numbers on here, don't really worry about it. But what I want to show you is the economic prosperity of a disaster. Okay, so over time is on the bottom, and up vertically, we have economic wealth and activity, whatever measure you want to have. So over time, you have an expected upward trajectory of how well your community will be doing. Then you have a disaster and it drops off. What you'd ideally like is to recover back up to that same trajectory, and your loss is only going to be illustrated by that area under the curve, that yellow area. What turns a simple disaster, something that is bad but recoverable from, into a catastrophe is not being able to return to that same level and not being able to continue at the same expected growth that you have. The pink area is the lost revenue. Okay, if you're able to recover quickly, you only lose a little bit, but if you don't get back to that same level that you were hoping, then there's a lot harder of a recovery process, and it takes many, many more years. A real-life application of this, we're going to look at New Orleans versus Nashville. Okay, so time is along the horizontal, and vertically we have gross domestic product. You don't need to worry about the numbers. So that's Nashville. I'm in the notes so you guys can see that. That's New Orleans. Okay? If you look before Hurricane Katrina, which is where New Orleans drops, obviously, they have the same slope, the same trajectory. New Orleans has an even higher GDP than Nashville. But after Katrina, they weren't able to recover, and they're still not back. Well, it looks like they're starting to return back to that same level of prosperity and productivity, but they had so much lost income and GDP that we'll see what happens. But we don't want to become this scenario, which illustrates my point. What we do now, before the earthquake, will really determine what our lives are like afterwards. So if you want to know about the shakeout, which is the application of the shakeout scenario, go to shakeout.org. And it is a day to take action. It is a day to practice and prepare for what you would actually do in the event of a disaster. Cannot encourage you enough to get prepared. I think that is the way to cope and deal with all of the scary things I just talked about, is to get prepared. Okay? I'm hoping you're on the same page if you're here. So as Mark said, but I don't think he had to take off, but as he said, you are responsible for ensuring your personal preparedness. They're not going to be able to come to each one of your homes the day of the disaster and check in with you. They might like to, but that's not realistic if it's really bad. So you're responsible for yourselves. This doesn't have to be cost prohibitive. I'm a graduate student. I also work for the government, but I'm a graduate student, and so I have the student mentality of a free meal, okay. But preparing for students for disasters sounds really expensive. I just keep extra canned foods on hand. When I use them, I replace them. That's how you can keep your food supplies up. You don't have to worry about like replacing them all every 5 years. You use them and you replace them. Or you replace them first and then you use them. Same with your water supply. I keep 18 liters of water in the trunk of my car. Okay, that's an easy one. If I use one, I buy another one. It's easy. So, I want you guys to think about this. If you knew that you had 1 day, or 1 week, or 1 month, or 1 year to get ready for a big disaster, you would do it. If you knew the date of the earthquake, you would be ready by then. So take the date of the shakeout as that date. Okay, I've only got a few slides left, so we're good, Susan. Okay, so earthquake preparedness, the biggest thing I can stress to you is have water. That is the thing that you need most to survive. We need water. Food is important also, but first and foremost, you need water. Okay? So make sure that you have enough for yourself and your loved ones and pets, and that you will be able to be self-sufficient. I mean, at a minimum of 3 days. 3 days is like a gross minimum. 7 to 10 is much better if you're able to prepare for that much, and even longer if possible. So really think through, go through your average day or an exceptional day and think about what I need. How many calories do I like to consume? Can I do without them? No. Okay, so I need to have food that I can have for 3 to 5 days, or 7 days, or 10 days, or whatever you're willing to accept as your risk. Okay? Northridge, you could go drive and buy a bottle of water. In this shakeout scenario, you won't be able to do that. Everything will be sold out everywhere. And you won't be able to drive to the places where it's not sold out. I recommend having a fire extinguisher. They're really easy to use. I've actually put out a fire in my apartment building with a fire extinguisher. Cannot stress, they're simple to use, and if anyone wants to talk how to do it afterwards, I will give you a demo. Think about securing your space. If you have top-heavy furniture, make sure that it's like bolted to the walls or secure it in some fashion that is going to make it not tip over. Water heaters should already be secured, but if they're not, make sure they are. TVs and electronics, vulnerable structures. If you have something heavy and big, it will move during an earthquake. During a big enough earthquake, your refrigerator can walk across the floor. Your TV, anything that's not strapped down, can become a projectile. Okay? You don't want to be near it. Also think about spaces which you travel through. So the Northridge earthquake, one of the largest causes of injuries was broken glass. There was parents at 4:16 in the morning running through the hallway to their kids, stepping on the broken glass from the pictures that had fallen in the hallway. Secure your pictures, keep sturdy shoes by your bed, and make sure that any route that you travel, like I would like to tell you all to stay where you are during the earthquake, but if you're a parent and you have a 5-month-old or an 8-year-old or whatever down the hallway, you want to be there. So make sure that if you are not going to make a decision to stay in the same location during an earthquake, which I encourage, then make sure that your route is safe. No bookcases in front of doors, that kind of thing. I'm going to keep going for a minute, hold those questions. Okay? And as Mark said, please establish an emergency plan. Have redundancies in your emergency plan. If your first location that your evacuation is not accessible, you need a second location. If your emergency contact is not reachable, have a second emergency contact and know their numbers by heart. And make sure your family knows those numbers as well. Quick reminder to myself. So this is the resource that I brought. Unfortunately, I don't have enough for everyone, but this is called Putting Down Roots in Earthquake Country. It is entirely available online as a PDF. So the website on the back, which you can see if you want to look at it.
Well, if you don't have one, you don't know what the website is.
There's 50 of them up here. So maybe if there's enough, one per family. I'm not sure how many of you guys came together, but it's earthquakecountry.org. earthquakecountry.org. And what I want to draw your attention to in the middle of this, it's got a lot of really good information about the science behind earthquakes and how to prepare, that kind of thing. There's 7 steps to earthquake safety. So the before, during, and after of what to do to prepare for an earthquake. And I think the third step, and it tells you how to secure your home. The third step, the page with the little emergency backpack on it, has a checklist. People say, what do I need? What do I need? Well, I can tell you water, and then there's a lot more specifics besides that. So this is a really good, thorough checklist. It's not all inclusive. It's not every little detail, but it's got a lot of detailed information. So I've got this one up at the front if you want to look at it, but I've got enough for maybe every other person to take home as well. And also think about the places you spend time. So if you spend 8, 9, 10 hours a day at work, or if you spend time at church, or if you spend time at home, think about hazards in each of those locations and how to better prepare for them. So store water, that's, like I said, the biggest thing you need is water. This is in Southern California after an earthquake. The magnitude 5.1 La Habra earthquake. It ruptured water pipelines in this community. No one's tap worked. This guy didn't have water stored, so what did he do? He took a detergent jug that was empty and went and picked up water from one of the many puddles from the broken water main in the street. Okay, this was a 5.1. That can cause water lines to rupture, so make sure you store water. Okay, so just a couple of scenarios of what to do during an earthquake. If you're in bed, stay in bed. Okay, I know that's a little disconcerting. Maybe you should go under the bed. No, stay in bed. The bed could move unless your bed is bolted down. Your bed's going to move around in a big enough earthquake. What you want to do is get as small as you can, put a pillow over your head and neck, and basically pretend like you're doing a drop, cover, hold on drill, but in bed. So curl up as small as you can, pull the covers up over your head. You basically want to protect your head and your neck, most of all on your body. That is the case for all of these scenarios. Protect your head and your neck, okay? Those are the most important parts of your body. Okay, if you break a hand, break a foot, it's going to hurt and it's not going to be fun, but this is the part that needs to stay safe. If you're on a high rise, drop, cover, and hold on away from windows. Don't use elevators, okay? Stay where you are. Outdoors, make sure that you are in a clear area and drop and cover as if there were things around you, because tree branches can fall. There can be things that you don't even realize are hazardous to you that can be. If you're driving, we live in Southern California, we drive. If you're driving and an earthquake hits, you might not feel it. If you notice all of the other cars around you, like freaking out as if something is going wrong and kind of driving weird, you might be feeling an earthquake. If it feels like you have a flat tire, you either have a flat tire or it's an earthquake. That is the sensation of a large earthquake while you're driving, is that you've gotten a flat tire. So what you would do in the event of a flat tire, you would pull safely over to the side of the road. Same thing in an earthquake. Pull safely over to the side of the road. If you can avoid being under an overpass, please do so, okay? Last scenario, if you are in a stadium, stay at your seat. If you're able to get under, like if you're in a movie theater or at a sports stadium or something like that, if you're able to get under your seat, and use it to protect your head, awesome. If not, just stay in your seat and try to get low. If you're able to get below the level of the seats, that's also a really good thing to do. Don't use elevators. Don't go into a doorway. Don't do triangle of life. The doorway thing, I can tell you that comes from back in 1857, what were the structures in California? They were adobe. For a long time, most of the structures in California were adobe. In an adobe structure, go into the doorway. It is the most structurally sound part of the building. Any other modern structure, it is no more strong to be standing right here than to be in the doorway. In the doorway, you also have added hazards of doors slamming open and shut. There could be glass in the doorway. Fingers could get squished. It could hit you in the back of your head. The doors will go very, very fast, okay? Also, the precipice between the inside and the outside is a very dangerous place. That's where there are a lot of decorative things. There are bricks, there are windows. Things that can hurt you are at the precipice. So don't change from inside and outside. That's why we say don't run outside in an earthquake, is because it's a very dangerous decision to make, to move from inside to outside. Moving in an earthquake, moving around to different places is a very dangerous decision also, because in one location, you have a bunch of hazards to deal with. If you change locations and go somewhere else, you have your first location's hazards and your second location's hazards. If you run all over the place, then you have a bunch of different hazards to deal with. So stay in one location if it's safe to do so. It's also a good idea to have small bills on hand, keep gas in your car. Again, know your emergency plan. Don't run outside. Okay.
Can you explain why you do not recommend the triangle?
You noticed that I went away from that one. I said it, but I went away from it. I have a lot to say on this subject. The gist of it, the question was, why do I not recommend the triangle of life? For those of you who don't know what the triangle of life is, I'm very excited that you don't know what it is. Don't know what it is. No, I'll tell you what it is. It's the idea that you should get next to something heavy like a refrigerator and crouch down next to that, because if there is a roof collapse, then it will make a triangle next to the heavy object and you will be in this void space and safe. Sounds really good on paper. What if the roof collapses this way? What if it falls straight down? It's much, much safer to be under something that can actually support weight, like a table. Simple physics, force equals mass times area. The more the force is, the larger the area, you want to be able to take that force. This is a very small area. I do not want this to take the force. I'd much rather have a table to be under that can take a lot more force. There's a viral email that gets sent around that talks about the triangle of life, and he references a school in Mexico City where children were found dead, crushed underneath their desks when the roof collapsed during the Mexico City earthquake. The earthquake was before school started. It was at like 4 in the morning. There were no kids in school. The guy who sends the emails around is phony. He goes to disaster sites and like takes pictures of himself there wearing a vest looking official. So that's what I have to say about that. It is not safer. I highly recommend doing drop, cover, and hold on. It is definitely the best way to go. Sorry. Drop, cover, hold on. It's the way to go. Okay, last little bits here. So after the earthquake, basically what you want to do is you want to check yourself and those around you for any injuries, check for damage, watch out for chimneys. If you have a way to turn on a radio or find like a ham radio, that's a good way to get information. Stay out of damaged buildings. Be careful around broken glass and debris. Stay away from beaches. If there is a tsunami potential, you don't want to be near the water. And if you're at school or work, follow the emergency plan at the location where you are and then try to get in touch with your family. Expect aftershocks. The ground will continue to shake. So I recommend that you are staying under that table the entire duration of the earthquake. If it's a long earthquake, it's going to feel like forever, okay? When really it might just be 45 seconds or 60 seconds, okay? But what I also recommend is staying under the table after the shaking has stopped. So the most likely time for a damaging aftershock is immediately after the big earthquake. So as time passes, the likelihood of a big aftershock decreases. They can still happen, but your highest likelihood, your highest possibility of getting a big aftershock is right after the big earthquake. So stay under there for maybe a few minutes. I would basically double the time of what you felt the shaking. Stay under the desk or under the table. Okay. One thing that I wanted to mention, I put on my sticky note of things that I wanted to mention. So after the 2010 Chilean earthquake, I got to go be part of a team, including Red Cross members and seismologists and such, that went down to Chile and learned about why they did so well in their earthquake. It was an 8.8, and about 525 people were killed. That's a very small number for how large that earthquake was, and the fact that it generated a deadly tsunami. Okay, so one of the biggest lessons that we learned from them was prior communication was critical. So if you were up in Santiago where they felt the shaking but the damage wasn't so bad, it was very political. They talked about, was there a tsunami warning issued? Was there not a tsunami warning issued? When you went to the area where the tsunami hit, they couldn't have cared less whether a tsunami warning was issued. They knew what to do in the event of a tsunami, and they evacuated. All of the local firefighters knew everyone in town. They talked to them on a regular basis. The townspeople knew each other. They talked to each other on a regular basis. If there was someone with extra needs, someone knew to go check on them. So neighbors were looking after neighbors. It was a very small, like a grassroots effort that was able to make it so successful in the areas that were hit so hard and that they lost so few people. So I want to stress communication, and events like this is how that happens. Okay. Remember, we're all in this together. So I want to close. I've got something written on my computer, and I want to actually say it. So an earthquake is not going to be an everyday thing. I don't want you to be afraid that every single day you're going to feel big, strong, scary earthquakes. But it could be an any day thing. So geology tells us that, in fact, the next time you're in the mountains climbing, hiking, or admiring the view, take a moment to appreciate that earthquakes built those mountains. So even if we learn to accept earthquakes as part of our culture, and if we prepare for them and innovate our technologies to be able to work with earthquakes and not against them, then we'll be a much healthier, safer, and more prepared society. So I've got contact information up here. I also brought a lot of business cards, and I'm not sure how much time we have for questions because this went for quite a while.